Well, thank you for the great honor that you have given me to allow me to come. I had a wonderful time with your deacons last January, and I'm honored to be invited back. I've actually admired your church from afar for a long time. Mike Queen and Jane Davis and I are longtime friends. And Brad and Sally Rosenland and Tim and Lane Johnson, I don't know if you remember them, several years ago moved from Wilmington to Richmond, Virginia, and joined Bon Air Baptist Church, where I was pastor. So I heard of their deep love for this congregation from them. Matt and I have been able to call each other friends only for a couple of years, but I've admired Matt from a distance as a leader for a long time, and it's been an honor to spend time with him again. I learned back during the deacons retreat and in subsequent conversations with Matt, I've learned about Love Does, your missional emphasis for this year, and I've heard about your passion for hunger and homelessness, for education and people who are incarcerated, and for refugees. And now I understand that in the second year, some of you are asking, where is the intersection of my God-given gifts and the needs of the world? And you're asking about callings beyond these walls. And so I want to congratulate you. I want to encourage you. And if it's okay, I want to challenge you a little bit. C.S. Lewis wrote, "There are times in all our lives when angels hold their breath to see which way we will go." I don't want to be melodramatic, but I do wonder if maybe at this juncture in your history, just like the same juncture at First Baptist Huntsville, where I'm pastor, I wonder if at this point in our histories, angels are holding their breath to see which way that your church and my church will go. I'm not the historian that Matt is, but I would venture to guess that there have not been any more important moments in your church's life and in my church's life than this one. When, as you know, the world is changing so quickly, and we're wondering, what is the future of the church in North America? So I want to applaud you for asking the question. I want to applaud you for being part of the answer to that question. And so I want to spend our time this morning talking about those who are behind us and those who are beyond us. By behind us, I mean the generations that are coming, and by beyond us, I mean those who are beyond the circles, the walls of the church, and beyond the family that we call the family of God. So let's talk first about those who are behind us, the coming generations. Some of the most maddening words in all the Bible, for me, are found in 2 Kings 20. There's the story of Hezekiah, the spiritual leader of Israel. And he's a wonderful leader, a great role model for leaders. But on this occasion, he failed the test of leadership. Isaiah, the prophet, said to Hezekiah, "It's going to get bad. For your grandchildren and their children," Isaiah said, "it's not going to be good. They will be carried captive into Babylon." Now, you would expect a spiritual leader, especially one thinking about his grandchildren, you'd expect him to respond, "What can we do at this important moment? What can we do?" But instead, Hezekiah responded, "At least there will be peace and security in my generation." What maddening words. Boy, that's just too bad for my grandkids and their kids. But at least things will be okay for me. I hope nobody here is thinking that. I do fear, though, that across the country there are Christians, good people, who are thinking that. You're seeing the statistics about the decline of churches. Maybe people are hearing about how younger generations are not coming to faith in Jesus nearly in the numbers that my generation and some of your generations did. I hope we're not saying, well, at least there will be peace and security in my generation. I hope nobody's saying, well, as long as the church is around for me, as long as the church is around so that somebody can bring casseroles to me when I come home from the hospital, as long as the church is around for my grandkids to get married in, as long as, if I could meddle just a bit, as long as the church is around for them to hold my funeral, and then I hope nobody's saying that. The statistics are not good, and the word is not encouraging about the future in some ways. But I do think we can do something about it. I was in Waco, Texas, where my son went to the same seminary where Matt did, and I saw on the wall of his church a verse that I had never, in the children's wing, a verse that I had just never paid attention to, Psalm 71:18, that says, "Even when I am old and gray," and I am, "but even when I am old and gray, do not forsake me, O Lord, until I declare your power to the next generation, your might to all who are to come." And immediately that verse grabbed me and has become one of what I would call one of my life verses. Even when I'm old and gray, God, don't abandon me. Let me live until at least I have opportunities to declare to the next generations what I know you, who I know you to be. And it's become more personal since that day that I first saw that verse. Because of Liam and Lydia and Beckett, my 3 grandchildren. It's gotten really personal now. And my hunch is it's personal for some of you, because there can't be this many people in a room without some of us being deeply concerned about the spiritual condition of our grown children and our grandchildren. This is personal. So let's not say, well, at least it will be all right for me. Let's turn and build bridges to those behind us, those who are coming. A member of what we call the greatest generation, the World War II generation, wrote, "An old man traveling a lone highway came in the evening, cold and gray, to a chasm vast and deep and wide, through which there flowed a swollen tide. The old man crossed in the twilight dim. The swollen stream held no fear for him, but he turned when safe on the other side, and he built a bridge to span the tide. 'Old man,' cried a fellow pilgrim near, 'you're wasting your time in building here. Your journey will end at the close of day. You never again will pass this way. You've crossed the chasm deep and wide. Why build you this bridge at evening tide?' The builder lifted his old gray head. 'Good friend, in the path I have come,' he said, 'there follows after me today a youth whose feet must pass this way. This stream, which has been as naught to me, to that fair-haired youth may pitfall be. He too must cross in the twilight dim. Good friends, I'm building this bridge for him.' Most of us in this room have crossed that swollen stream and taken that step or maybe leap of faith to follow Jesus. But it's harder today. The distractions and the temptations, and quite frankly, the fact that in our culture, people are increasingly either apathetic toward or hostile toward what we believe. It's harder today for your children and my children, our grandchildren and their children to cross that swollen stream. So we're going to have to build some bridges to those who come behind us. And I'm not sure exactly what that means for First Wilmington. We're still trying to figure that out in Huntsville. But maybe it means when you're thinking of programs, think of children and young adults. Even when it comes to the budget, think of children and young adults. When it comes to leadership in the church, think of passing the baton at the appropriate times to young adults. Now, I want you to hear me. If you're my age, or if you're older than I am, please hear me. This does not mean you and I are not important. It doesn't mean that at all. It just means there's a sense of urgency now. This is not about us being unimportant or not valued. It's just that there's a sense of urgency regarding those who come behind us, because they are following Jesus in smaller numbers and coming to church in smaller numbers. And that's a big deal. Well, let's build bridges to those who come behind us. For whatever that means for First Wilmington, whatever that means for you, please build bridges to those who are coming behind you, because it's harder to cross than it was when you and I crossed. What about those beyond us, though? Not just those behind us, but those beyond the circle, beyond the walls of the church, beyond the circles of the Christian family. C.T. Studd was a missionary to Africa, a British missionary at the turn of the 20th century. He wrote some words that have become fairly well known. He wrote, "Some want to live within the sound of church or chapel bell. I'd rather run a rescue shop within a yard of hell." Some people would rather live within the sound of chapel bell, where things are comfortable and where they're familiar and where we kind of know what to do and how to act around each other. But there are a few who have a missionary spirit and who would say, we'd like to try to run some rescue shops within a yard of hell. Now, where would hell be? Of course, the Bible teaches that hell is an awful place beyond that thin veil that separates this world from the next. But hell has also come to be used to describe dark places and places of despair and spiritual lostness in this world. And so where would hell be in Wilmington? What picture do you have in mind? Well, hell could be anywhere from Landfall to Creekwood, from Wrightsville Beach to Houston Moore, from Forest Hills to Hillcrest. Because despair, despondency, and spiritual lostness are not determined by addresses. So what would it mean for First Wilmington to build some rescue shops within a yard of hell? Well, I don't know exactly what that would mean, but I do think it implies at least meeting human needs and helping human hurt, number one. Number two, helping people find their way to Jesus. So let's talk about those. First, meeting human needs and helping human hurt. A few years ago, I read a story about some folks who were skiing in Colorado, and they had gotten out of bounds, beyond the places where you're supposed to ski, and they'd gotten over in a dangerous place, and they'd gotten into trouble. And this group called the Alpine Rescue Team went and helped them. Now, the Alpine Rescue Team was risking their own safety. They were risking their own lives to go and help these knuckleheads who had gotten over there where they shouldn't be. And I thought, well, that's a fascinating thing, and that I kind of put out by that, by the fact that somebody would get where they shouldn't be and then cause others to put themselves at risk. And so I Googled the Alpine Rescue Team. I thought, who does that? And on the website, I saw a phone number, so I called them. And I got a guy named Bill Barwick, who's their communications director, something like that. And I told him I'd seen the story and I'd read the stories on their website. And I said to him, I'm just fascinated that you would go and risk yourself to help people. And I may have said knuckleheads, who get out there where they shouldn't be. And he said, yeah, you're right. There are people who don't use the right equipment. There are people who ski beyond the signs, it says don't ski beyond here or whatever they say. I don't snow ski, but whatever they say, you're not supposed to go beyond them. He said there are people, and I'd never heard this, he said there are people who start avalanches just for the thrill of riding an avalanche. Knucklehead comes to mind again. And I said, I got to be honest, I'm fascinated that you all would put yourselves at risk for people who have been irresponsible. He began to speak, and when he did, I grabbed my pen and I began to write. I want you to hear a little of what he said. He said, when you offer your service free of charge, that also implies that you offer your service free of judgment. He said, we are here for the just-in-case moments of life. Just in case means not rescuing people only if they've done everything right. He said, we don't sit in judgment. We're there to do what nobody else will do. Mr. Barwick told me that folks who complain about those people who do stupid things and don't deserve to be rescued, and probably was quoting me at that point, He said that those folks who complain about those people who do stupid things and don't deserve to be rescued never are out there risking life and limb to rescue people in trouble. In other words, people who sit at home and complain about those people, those irresponsible people who got themselves in that situation, they don't join the Alpine Rescue Team. They sit at home and complain about those irresponsible people who got themselves in trouble. Man, that checked me up a little bit on my attitude about those people that we help at church sometimes. I don't know about here, but sometimes in Huntsville and other places I've served, some of the people we've helped got themselves in those situations by bad choices, by bad decisions. And I've been a little bit resentful of that. Why are we helping people who've put themselves there? Kind of maybe not so much that they made their bed, let them lie in it, but at least they made their bed. At least I've thought that. So I wondered about this, and I wondered if I would make it as a member of the Alpine Rescue Team. It's made me think a little bit, I hope, more Christian about meeting human needs through our churches. Now, please hear me, I'm not suggesting we perpetuate a welfare mentality. And I'm not suggesting that we enable people to continue making bad choices. I'm not suggesting those things, but I am suggesting that we offer a hand up to people and a second chance to people who are down there and who need a second chance because of their own doing. Now, lots of people we help are there by no choice of their own. I understand that. But some are there because they made bad choices. But what if we were to be a little more Christian and help meet human needs and help solve human hurts, even when people have gotten themselves in those situations? Now, it won't be easy. It won't be easy, and it will be messy. Let me tell you a quick side story. So, you can't see it, but I have a brand new white shirt on, covered up by this beautiful robe. I have a white shirt on because I forgot to pack my white shirt when I left Huntsville to come here. And the reason I forgot, I have a really good excuse, because I got in really late Friday night. I referee high school football, so I was out at a football game, got in really late, and I threw things in a bag because I had to get up early Saturday morning to fly, and so I was in a bit of a rush. And so I love officiating high school football. If you think being a pastor is easy, just think about this. To relax, to get away, I go stand out in the cold and let people yell at me. That's why. So this is my 16th year. So 16 years ago, in my first year, I was officiating a game and really excited. I was working as head linesman. I don't know if you know anything about football, but if the team is lined up this way and the offense is headed this way and the defense is headed this way, then on either side there's the line judge and the linesman, and we look down the line of scrimmage. And so if somebody jumps off sides, we're the ones who blow the whistle, or we're the ones who spot the ball, who give him, okay, here's where the run ended, and that kind of thing. And we're the ones who get to call the touchdowns, which is really the only moment in the whole game we get to shine. So a touchdown is a big deal for us. And we have been told in training to sell your call, that don't let anybody wonder what you're calling. Let everybody know what the call is. So I understood that, and I understood the thrill of a touchdown. So this team had this big brawny guy that they would hand the ball to, and he would run through the line 4 or 5 yards, and it would take a bunch of the other members of the other team to tackle him, but they would tackle him, and he'd run another 4 or 5 yards, and they were just marching down the field. And they got down toward the goal line, and so my antenna are up. I'm thinking, hey, here's my moment, and this guy's going to score. And so we are also taught, when they get near the goal line, you should step first to the goal line, so you beat him there, because when that ball crosses the goal line, breaks the plane of the goal line, well, that's a touchdown. So this team is driving, and they're down near the goal line, and they hand it off to him, and I step up to the line, and I'm looking right down the line, and when the ball breaks the plane of the line, well, I blow my whistle as loudly as I can, and I go up, touchdown. Now, at that point, usually the team that scored would cheer and high five, and the other team would say things they ought not say, and that kind of stuff. But this time, when I blew my whistle and went up for a touchdown, both teams just turned and looked at me. And I thought, this can't be good. I looked down, and I was standing on the 5-yard line. The goal line was over there. So I learned a couple of things from that. One, always know where you are on a football field. But second, those who are afraid to call a touchdown on the 5-yard line never know the joys of calling a touchdown at all. It's messy. People, sometimes people don't like what you do, and sometimes we do mess up. And helping meet human needs is going to get messy, and you'll make mistakes, and some things won't work, and some people that you try to help will disappoint you, and there'll be tough budget discussions, and there'll be priority discussions. Boy, I hope you won't give up on that calling to help human herd and meet human needs beyond these walls. It's part of who we're supposed to be, and it's worth it. The deep joy and satisfaction that comes from that is worth all the messiness. So those beyond us are those who need for us to help meet their hurts and heal their hurts and meet their needs. And then there are those beyond us who are, to quote Ephesians 2:12, without hope and without God in the world. We don't use the term lost much anymore. It sounds so unsophisticated. But Jesus said he's come to seek and to save those who are lost. Ephesians 2:12 again, without hope and without God in the world. The more educated and sophisticated we become, the less we tend to think about people being without hope, without God in the world. But it's true. So I want to close with my favorite story, a story that I told to the deacons, and they asked me to tell you. In 1911, a little boy named J.D. was born in the coal mining villages of Western Virginia. When he was a little boy, his family moved to Sand Mountain, Alabama, not far from where I live now, where his dad became a sharecropper. J.D. finished the 6th grade, and that was it. Born in 1911 means that he was 18 years old when the Great Depression hit. And he partied and fought and hoboed his way around the Deep South during the Great Depression. When I met him, he had false teeth, and in the front of his false teeth there was a gold tooth where there had been a real gold tooth which replaced his tooth that had gotten knocked out, as he told me, during a fight as he was partying and fighting his way across the South. Well, the Great Depression, he settled down on Sand Mountain, married, and they had 2 children, a little boy named Freddie and a little girl named Betty Ruth. He was working at what's called Anniston Army Depot, and there also working at Anniston Army Depot was a woman named Maud. Maud had a 9th grade education and was working at a rather menial job at the Anniston Army Depot. She and J.D. met and developed a relationship. It began rather innocently, I understand, but pretty soon crossed a line. They became emotionally involved. They became physically involved. They had an affair. She was married, did not have children. He was married, as I said, had 2. J.D. and Maud ran off together, and there's no nice way to say it, abandoned. He abandoned his wife, his son and daughter. She left her husband, and they divorced, and they were married. Now, they moved to Anniston, Alabama, and their marriage was in trouble. J.D. was not on anybody's prospect list. No church in Anniston, he was not the kind of guy that churches like to come, He drank too much. He had a rough exterior. He was a rather unpolished guy. But there was a church, the Moore Avenue Baptist Church in Anniston decided to hold a tent revival. Now, some of you remember what tent revivals are. Back in the day, especially in the rural South, the church would rent a big circus-like tent, and they would invite a pulpit-pounding, fire-breathing evangelist. And so Moore Avenue Baptist Church decided to do that. They rented a lot downtown on Noble Street, and they got a big tent, and they secured the services of this fire-breathing, Bible-thumping, pulpit-pounding preacher from Chattanooga, Tennessee. And one day, a man that J.D. worked with said, "J.D., would you come to a service at the tent revival we're having?" Now, I wasn't there, but I imagine him taking a step back when he said that, because J.D. was not the kind of guy that most folks invited to church. J.D. went home and he said to Maud, "This guy at work wants me to come to tent revival. You want to go?" She said, "Well, it couldn't hurt." And so J.D. and Maud went to that tent revival down on Noble Street under that big tent. And say what you will about Bible-thumping, pulpit-pounding, fire-breathing evangelists, but this guy put the hay down where the cows could get to it, if you know what I mean. And so J.D., a guy who, by the way, told me that to that point, he might have been in church for a couple of funerals, somehow got hooked. And he wasn't quite sure exactly what was happening, but they went back the second night and the third night, and after several nights, Maud and J.D. went home. 200 East 30th Street in Anniston, Alabama, a 730, because I looked it up on Zillow, 730 square foot house. And J.D. couldn't sleep. And so he did the only thing he knew to do. He called Bartow. Bartow was his brother-in-law, who was a Baptist pastor. And I remember Bartow as a guy with big, broad shoulders and huge hands. Well, this was the middle of the night, but Bartow got up, got dressed, and drove from Oxford, Alabama, where he lives, about 15 minutes up to Anniston. And when he got to 200 East 30th Street, J.D. was crying like a little child, and through his tears said, "I don't know what's going on, but I've been going to this tent revival, and preachers talking about this stuff, and I just can't go to sleep." And Bartow said, again in language that he knew, he said, "Man, you're under the conviction of the Holy Spirit." And he talked to him about what it means to be born again, that conversion so dramatic that Jesus referred to it as a new birth. He talked to him about how you get saved, how you follow Jesus. And J.D. told me that on his knees in the living room, a living room that I know there at 200 East 30th Street, he pleaded with God for mercy, and God granted it to him and radically transformed his life, so that by the time I knew J.D., even with his gold tooth, he was a one-woman man devoted to Maud, active in his church, a great member of the community. And I love that story for a number of reasons. One, because Bartow, the Baptist preacher who got up in the middle of the night and drove up there, is my uncle. He's big shoulders, big hands. He used to grab right above my knee and nearly make me cry. I remember that. But I loved Uncle Bartow. And I love that story because J.D. was my father and Maud was my mother. That was 9 years before I was born. That was 1950. I was born in 1959. So Freddie and Betty Ruth are my half-brother and half-sister. The most important night of my life was 9 years before my birth. My mom and dad never told me how they met. I never knew the story of their affair. I always had a hunch because of some tensions with his first wife. But I was talking to my cousin one night. She was in Columbia, and we were talking about this. And I said, I think I know the story, but would you tell me what happened? And she did. And after all that, I said, you know, Linda, I don't know where I'd be if it hadn't been for that tent revival. Linda said, Travis, I don't know if you'd be if it weren't for that tent revival. Moore Avenue is not First Baptist Huntsville. Moore Avenue Baptist is not First Baptist Wilmington. But they had at least enough compassion for the JDs of the world to do something different. I do not know the ways of God, but I believe that if that church had not decided to have a tent revival, I don't think my dad ever would have gone to church as we know church. Even though he was not on anybody's, again, prospect list. So I'm deeply grateful for the Moore Avenue Baptist Church. Now, I wasn't there, of course, but I'm sure there was a business meeting. They were, after all, Baptists. And so I'm sure when the pastor or whoever it was stood and said, we ought to have a tent revival, somebody said, we've never had a tent revival before. And somebody said, do you know what tents cost nowadays? And somebody must have said, well, what will our Methodist and Presbyterian friends think about us if we do a tent revival? But the idea won the day, and that story drives me. And I have always wanted to be part of a tent revival church. Now, I'm not quite sure what the 21st century equivalent to a tent revival is, but I want to find that out, and I want to figure that out. I want us to do them. So I encourage you. I know it's not easy. And I know it's messy, and I know it can be discouraging. And as preachy as it sounds, as corny and hokey as it sounds, there are a lot of JDs out there who are, let's be honest, almost certainly not going to walk through the doors of this church or my church. So let's get serious about those who are behind us. And let's get serious about those who are beyond us. It would be my honor to pray for you. Would you join me, please? Lord, I pray for these, my brothers and sisters, who stand at what is perhaps a really important moment in their history. Grant to them wisdom and grant to them courage. May their fellowship be strong, and may their vision be clear. For the sake of Wilmington, and for the sake of the next JDs. In the name of our common Savior, I pray these things. Amen.